Thank you for being here, everyone. It's wonderful to see you. This is day 2 of the Festival of Ideas and our very first session of the day. It's going to be a little different from some of the sessions we've had yesterday. It's going to be an interview with Professor Jenna Jambeck, who is sitting here with us, and me. I will be doing this interview together with Dr. Katie Ireland, and so we'll do a sort of tag team type setup. So Dr. Katie Ireland is the interim director of the Digital Humanities Lab, or the DigiLab as we call it here at UGA. It's sponsored by the Wilson Center and it's located in the main library of the University of Georgia. Dr. Ireland holds a PhD in corpus linguistics, and her research focuses on interdisciplinary applications of text analysis. My name is Anna Abraham. I'm the festival director and the director of the Torrance Center for Creativity and Talent Development. My own work is in the domains of creativity and the imagination. I apply multidisciplinary lenses there. Katie and I decided to do this together because we are curious about many things in the creative process, and especially the opportunity to interview someone who's decidedly creative. Professor Jenna Jambeck here is with us as an environmental engineer, and she is the Georgia Athletic Association Distinguished Professor of Environmental Engineering at the University of Georgia. Professor Jambeck is internationally recognized for her research on plastic waste in the ocean. She is the co-developer of the mobile app Marine Debris Tracker, the tool that facilitates a global citizenship science initiative that has documented the location of several million, I don't know how many, but I'm sure she'll tell us, several million litter and marine debris items removed from our environment. So for her work in investigating the scale and pathways of plastic pollution and galvanizing efforts to address plastic waste, she was named a National Geographic Fellow in 2018, and just very recently, a MacArthur Fellow in 2022. So when I was looking up what who the awards, such esteemed awards go to, I read a quote from the director of the MacArthur Fellowship Awards, and she stated the following about the 2022 MacArthur Fellows. They are architects of new modes of activism, artistic practice, and citizen science. They are excavators uncovering what has been overlooked, undervalued, or poorly understood. They are archivists reminding us of what should survive. Their work extends from the molecular level to the land beneath our feet to Earth orbital environment, offering new ways for us to understand the communities, systems, and social forces that shape our lives around the globe. So we are really deeply privileged to have someone like Professor Jambeck to speak to us today, and I'm so thrilled and honored that she's decided to do so at the 2023 Torrance Festival of Ideas, and we look forward greatly to her sharing her knowledge and insights with us. Welcome, Professor Jambeck.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here as well. It's great to be a part of a creativity festival. So I don't know that necessarily lots of engineers get to do stuff like this. So appreciate it.
Yeah, gosh, thank you so much. We'll jump right in then with our questions. So can you tell us first about plastic pollution in terms of the history of research on this really important topic?
Sure. Yeah, I think to start, I'd like to talk briefly. I'm going to have a few slides at some of these about a book that is coming out this August, so August 22nd. And Amari Walker Franklin invited me to join her on this book. And what I really am excited about is that you can see this is just a paperback book. It's with a series called the Essential Knowledge Series with MIT Press, and it's really accessible. So instead of a really large textbook that not very many people might get access to or could afford, this is affordable. It's in black and white, and really a very easily digestible way to communicate about this issue, and I think people know that's a passion of mine. So I'm going to read an excerpt and then talk a little bit about more of the history of plastic, but I think this is a great introduction. So pretend you're reading the book, as you hopefully will do in the future. So wherever you are right now, look around. Do you perhaps have the book in one hand and your phone made of various metals, plastics, and glass in the other? Are you possibly perched on a park bench made of recycled plastic bags, or on your polyurethane mattress? Did you recently flip on a light switch to read this? We come into contact daily with many items of plastic, such as your phone or parts of your phone, carpet, furniture, and light switches. Some plastic items may not be obvious, including multi-materials containing plastic. For example, your clothing might be polyester blend or fleece. A disposable coffee cup is paper lined with polyethylene, and metallic-looking chip and snap bags are plastics with a very thin layer of aluminum. While plastic is still used as an adjective in soil science, it's now really a noun that is mostly known to us as any numerous organic, synthetic, or processed materials that are mostly thermoplastic or thermosetting polymers of high molecular weight that can be made into objects, films, or filaments. So according to Google, if you look at this timeline, the use of the word plastic correlates with the timeline of the history and development of the common material we use today. Since it was discovered in the 1860s, but then brought to the public marketplace in the 1950s in numerous forms, plastic has become ubiquitous in our everyday lives. Plastic, as the name of the material we now know, literally exploded onto the marketplace when humans were looking for a replacement for natural materials like ivory. The feedstock for most plastics today is fossil fuels, oil, and gas, but the invention of plastics came from a raw plant material, cellulose. So I want you to, you'll be able to see in the full book, the literal explosive story, more on the invention of plastics and the development of the throwaway culture. But as disposable culture for plastics grew, so did the concern over waste management. How would our waste management system handle a material it had never seen before? Even the industry knew this might be an issue as they discussed this at meetings where the information never saw the light of day in those time periods. And so I also kind of wanted to show this slide to present, the production and really the growth of plastics in the field. And this was a collaboration for research with Roland Geyer and Kara Lavender Law. And this is, you can really see through numbers why I study plastic pollution. We talk about the usefulness of this material and that intro I just read, if you look around how you see this. But what I want to also talk about here is that the societal changes that we've seen with plastics have really come at the expense of people who live near these production facilities. So traditional plastics do come from fossil fuels, as I said, oil and gas, with facilities concentrated in the area known as Cancer Alley in Louisiana, from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. Where I was able to meet with community members. And you can't help but then notice the refineries all up and down the Mississippi River where we traveled for our work. And not too long ago, I was at a global treaty summit in Washington, D.C., where environmental justice was really brought to the forefront now. And this discussion is happening at higher levels. But these communities with these facilities have been fighting these battles for years. So we didn't really start recording the quantity of plastic that we were producing until about 1950, although I mentioned the invention happened earlier. But as of 2015, there was 8.3 billion metric tons produced, and an impossible number, right, to visualize, even when we try to put it into something that you could. I mean, I still have trouble with one blue whale, let alone 80 million. And this is still projected to grow. And because about 40% of what is produced for packaging, and then even more for consumer goods, that meant by 2015, we had already produced 6.3 billion metric tons as waste. And when we look at recycling, which I know, a lot of people make efforts to do, but because plastic is so variable, we've really only been able to recycle 9% globally. Even in the US, that's a little bit lower. It's about 5 to 6%. A small amount is incinerated, which is really the only way that it disappears. And that, of course, the carbon is released at that point. So that means that almost 80% has ended up in our landfills or in the natural environment. And that's really, what we end up seeing around us. So yeah, that's, I think, a good kind of intro and background on what's been happening and why I looked at this issue.
Great, thank you. So the next question is related. In what ways are the problems of plastic pollution worse or better than non-plastic pollution?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna share another picture for this answer because I think it will be helpful. And I like this question because it really just kind of made me think about how we've studied all kinds of other pollution sources much longer, and how, you know, a lot of the data that comes out on plastics right now is fairly new, or some of the first time, you know, we've looked at it this way. But I think one thing, so this right here is plastic that had fragmented and was washing up on the coast in the Canary Islands. Before I ended up crossing the Atlantic Ocean on a sailboat. This is what we saw. This is a deposition site. So plastic does not biodegrade. It fragments over time. So you can see pieces of thing you recognize here, like a straw. You can still see a cigarette butt. You can see those tiny little pellets. Those are the pre-production pellets for plastic before it gets made into something. Then there's fragments, you know, that you don't recognize as well. But plastic is visual. So when we think about it compared to other pollution sources that you can't visualize, I mean, let's just even talk about, you know, climate change and so compared to that, but things like nutrients, even, you know, other pollution sources, we do and can see plastic in our environment and react to that. I would say, though, one thing that I thought about, though, because of this variability, it's been a bit harder to quantify in the environment. So it's also, as I said, sort of a new source. But when you think about like taking a soil sample and looking for trace metals, for example, or some contaminant, that's fairly standardized. There hasn't been a lot of standardization of being able to look at the concentration of plastics in the environment. And so that has actually made it challenging. And then I think I kind of referenced how variable plastic is. So that's another thing. There's, you know, many different polymers. And then to that, there's thousands of ways to add different additives that, you know, change the polymer. It can be, you know, rigid or soft or, you know, any color of the rainbow. And so I think part of that also makes it challenging. And then I think sort of the last thing, as I was thinking about impacts, we have been able to measure and describe, I think, the impacts to ecosystems and animals, especially ingestion and entanglement and things like that. But now we're thinking about potential impacts of plastics to human health. And because they're everywhere and confounded by other things that are in our daily environment, I think that is making it hard to discern exactly what the impacts to us are. But to me, that's sort of the cutting edge of where we are with considering impacts of plastic. So I think it's both potentially easier to see and describe in some ways, and yet harder as well.
That's great. I mean, that leads us to really the kind of projects that you have been involved in that has tackled this problem head on. So can you tell us a little bit about the projects that you've been working on that you've spearheaded really in research on plastic pollution, both past and perhaps if you're able to current directions as well that you're exploring?
Yeah. So yep. So for a bit more of us, I think it'll be helpful to have a few more slides, and then we'll be more discussion like after that, I know, but I think this will be helpful. But before I start, I just want to talk about so many amazing collaborators that I've had around the world. I mentioned that crossing the ocean. So the top middle picture is my X-Expedition team in 2014. That was a 72-foot sailboat that we not only were doing the research of looking for plastic floating on the ocean surface, but we're entirely sailing the boat. And the other mission was to promote women in underrepresented disciplines. And so that includes engineering, like I'm in, other STEM disciplines oftentimes, but also sailing. And so that was just an incredible experience. My current team now is, you know, digs in landfills and waste piles with me, and Our team for the National Geographic work is incredible, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then all the people around the world who I interface with on waste management, I think are often unrecognized. Everyone just kind of wants their waste to go away. Well, there's a whole system of people in the US, but also internationally, informally. And those folks have, sort of let me into their lives to have these conversations about what's going on. And then, of course, my family as well. I met my husband and fell in love at the landfill where we were doing research. And so that's been, I guess, a thread throughout our life. So in 2015, I think I'll start with this paper quantifying the plastic ending up in the ocean. This was groundbreaking at the time. This number had not been calculated before it had sort of included what we were dumping into the ocean. And so calculating this, which was equal to 8 million metric tons, about a dump truck of plastic going into the ocean every minute, now estimated at 11 million metric tons. This was significant, and that's the blue on the map here. This was a graphic produced by National Geographic where they mashed up some different research projects. The pink circles, not my work, others who have measured. So that was part of what we were doing when we were crossing the ocean, plastic floating on the surface, and that really. One of my great colleagues, Carol Lavender Law, has played a huge role in that. That really has only been about 3 to 5% of what we estimate is going into the ocean every year. So, that sort of begs this question, where is that missing plastic, which of course a lot of people are continuing to investigate. And of course, some of it's on the ocean floor. Some of it gets spit back out of the ocean, as I was describing in the Canary Islands. And these yellow sections are what's being discharged from rivers. And so this really, I think, finally connected our seeing plastic in the ocean with, what we were doing on land, which was immediately why I wanted to study this issue when I heard about it in 2000, but wasn't sort of, I think, immediately obvious to other people. And so, but I was like, as I was doing my environmental engineering and solid waste work on land, and then I heard about this issue, I'm like, I think we're doing something wrong if our waste is ending up in the ocean, right? It's not, that's not where we want it to be. And so, so after publishing this, I think one of the things we couldn't include in this analysis was what we did with our recycling. So a lot of people said, wait, yes, there was leakage from rapidly developing, economically developing middle-income countries, but we export a lot of our materials to those countries, so they're having to manage that as well. And so a PhD student of mine started looking at that, and we noticed this rapid increasing trend of exporting plastics intended for recycling. Before 2018, half of these were going to China, and in 2018, China implemented a restriction such that it basically became almost a ban of plastic scrap coming into country as they were working to develop their own domestic infrastructure. But I think what was really significant about this work, and several of our work pieces have really influenced global discussions, global policies, but this was part of the discussion of the Basel Convention. So this is a global treaty that governs the shipments of hazardous waste. And so there was an amendment made to include notification if you're going to export plastic a couple of years after this came out. And then we also wanted to look, in our backyard. This paper was led by Carol Lavender Law, but when we were, again, looking at leakage from countries, we really wanted to say, what's happening in the US specifically. And I think when you looked at that export and included illegal dumping besides the littering, we are the #1 producer of plastic waste in the world per person and as a country as a whole. So even a small amount of leakage ends up being significant, and we have a lot of coastline. So those factors together could rank us as high as third in the world for leakage. And another, so our initial 2015 work was an international working group, and there was another working group that I was able to participate in, and this paper was led by Steph Burrell, but it was parallel work with something that Pew and a consulting firm, Systemic, were doing, and these two studies came to the same conclusion. They were parallel but separate. So I think that was very significant. The other thing that when this came out in Science, the fact that the cover of Science magazine said plastic pollution, like, blew me away, because, you know, when I first wanted to study this issue, I was told that no one cared about it by the person I went to get advice on how to study it. And that person was actually right at the time, even in Florida where I was, where there was a lot of coastline. Luckily, I didn't listen, and I still was very interested and started studying it. But to go from sort of not even having this as a science to being on the cover of Science magazine in 2020 was significant. So these two studies, the bottom line is that basically, you know, people were like, this is just a solid waste issue. Once the plastic ends up in the environment, you know, if we increase solid waste, we'll be able to just prevent that. But they both showed that we just cannot keep up with that. There's no way with the increases that we're seeing that the infrastructure can keep up with it. So we need to reduce production in the first place. And then that, you know, brought us to thinking about, you know, plastic pollution really starts at production, which I referenced at the beginning of this talk. So thinking about that as a whole entire framework across the life cycle. So the first time I was asked to testify to Congress, I was like, well, how can we think about this in terms of, you know, how we had developed that model for what went into the ocean? It's like, well, if we didn't have more in the first place, that could reduce it. If we looked at other materials, that could reduce it. If we, you know, didn't generate this waste, if we had reusable systems, that could, you know, reduce it. And so if you look along this whole value chain, there's lots of opportunities for interventions that could reduce this input, hopefully to zero. But I just want to give a shout out to my colleague at the New Materials Institute, Jason Laughlin, who leads that. They're looking at biodegradable polymers and things that behave and have the characteristics of plastic for use, but that would not have those unintended consequences at disposal. And also those are not made of fossil fuels. Really interesting, you know, reuse systems now that are, you know, I think technology and the design skills that we have can facilitate those. So they're different than, you know, we're kind of going back to things we used to do, but at the same time, you know, we have technology that can help facilitate that and meet our needs of convenience and things like that. This framework was then adopted and sort of updated for the National Academy's committee and consensus report that I participated in pretty recently, just came out last couple of years. So this, I think, is where I get to some of our more current work. And this, you know, came out of really a lot of our research being a part of these global discussions and thinking about solutions in that space. A lot of people were talking about something called the circular economy. And it really, you know, it made sense in the way that we're saying, okay, then if everything was valued, if we, you know, looked at providing services instead of products, and, you know, we had this system where everything was circular, we had no waste. That would help solve, you know, the plastics problem. However, I think what was challenging is that I was also working some with the State Department, and I was doing visits to 13 different countries and interfacing with municipalities and other people in those countries. And they would say, okay, now we know about this issue, what should we do? And talking about the circular economy didn't quite make sense in a transferable way. And I think as an environmental engineer with my roots in community work, where, you know, I would teach urban systems and we do drinking water design for communities, wastewater design for communities, and solid waste, that's where a lot of these decisions are made. And, you know, concepts that are more theoretical are not quite as helpful. Like, this is where the burden of waste management lies. And so I also was like, you have the expertise in your community, right? You have the knowledge, you understand your culture and social norms, and that's something that I don't know. But could we collect data? So, like, you know, maybe if you had more data on what is in your community, how do community members feel about this issue? Are there any alternatives available? Are there resources around that could help create alternatives? Is there a reuse system? So anyway, that's how the circularity assessment protocol was sort of born. What is ending up leaking out of the system? And we've worked collaboratively in 37 cities and 10 countries with this framework. And really, it's about, I think, empowering communities with this data, having this data available to support decision making. And I hope information sharing, and then creating a systems change kind of from the ground up. So we used this and I think refined the protocol through the National Geographic work. So this is the Sea to Source expedition all the way from Bola, Bangladesh, in the Bay of Bengal to Harshal, India in the Himalayas. And this is over 2,000 kilometers. We did this twice in 2019, amazing team from 5 different countries, leaders in both Bangladesh and India, early career researchers that, you know, were able to participate and expand their work with this project. It's the first female co-led expedition from National Geographic, Heather Coldaway being the co-science lead with me. So there was 5 papers published, more in the works. But what I was really happy with is we're able to make the methods free and open. So that's something that's really important to me. And the tool that we use for a lot of data collection is Debris Tracker. Mentioned a little bit in my intro, but this was a collaboration. Well, I had this idea and ran into my colleague in the hall, and I just said, if 1 million people around the world picked up a cigarette butt and told us about it, would I crash our servers? And he was like, what? So this is Kyle Johnson. And he said no. And then what are you doing? And so that sort of led to this development collaboration of Debris Tracker here. It's 12 years old. It came out the same month as my youngest son was born. And we are at over 7 million items logged. And so this is really participatory sensing, citizen science, open data, open access to everything, right? So there's nothing more frustrating for me, I was as a scientist, is going and like, oh, this is a cool data set. And then like, oh, I can't like do anything with it because I don't have access, or you know, whatever it is, free and open to everyone. And I just think it's so just important to be able to have data that everyone can access and use. And last project I want to talk about, because it is right here in our major river in the US, the Mississippi River. After we did the Ganges work, the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative and the United Nations Environment Program North America reached out to us because they wanted us to help design a similar expedition, but they did not have the same kind of budget. They wanted to use community members and a citizen science initiative. So we were able to design that, work with these amazing mayors along the river. There's 102 mayors. These are some of the pilot cities that we worked in, and community members really came out and supported. They should not be burdened with this, but you know, as a part of collecting data to make some of these decisions, the mayors did galvanize and organize their communities to do this. Over 30,000 football fields were scientifically analyzed, over 136,000 items were logged. And they've gotten EPA grants and, you know, started various initiatives with this project. So, yeah, so I think that gives you a good, a good overview of kind of what's happening right now and what I'm doing.
Gosh, that's incredible stuff, and amazing infographics as well that helps communicate just the weight and just the intensity and extent of what you do. So thank you for that.
Sure.
And we're so glad that you decided to still study this, even
Yes.
though despite the advice
I
that
think
you
it
were
actually kind
given.
of lit a fire. That's kind of how I am. When someone's like, no one cares, I was like, I think they should. So I'm not gonna stop.
That's amazing. And you definitely touched on this just now, but Anna and I have lived and worked in different parts of the world and have noticed some pretty distinct and big differences on how people handle plastic, even in places like grocery stores and supermarkets. So like in the UK and Germany and Western Europe, you have to pay for plastic shopping bags. So people will bring their own cloth bags. And even in places like India, grocery stores don't have plastic bags available at the cashier. So what's up with the US? Why is this so different? Why are we lagging so far behind?
That's a good question. As I mentioned, we are the #1 plastic waste generator per person. And as a country, we are a big country. I think we are, a high income country. We have a lot of accessibility to resources. And, we tend to buy a lot of things. And I don't know that we we don't necessarily follow some of those same precautionary principles that we tend to see maybe in other places around the world. And I'm thinking kind of Europe for that one. I would also, I don't, the other thing that we have done here, it's not that we don't have any, policies. So there are, I think, collectively, we don't see sort of national policies, but we see city, and there are now sort of state policies. So we have sort of come together on those. The other thing you see here in the US are preemptive bans of bans. So interestingly enough, states and cities, but this has mostly been at the state level, will banning of something. So you're not allowed to have a plastic bag ban or sometimes tax in those situations. It's just different. It's a different culture here. So, but there are definitely states and cities that are leading the way with some of these policies to say, wait a minute, I don't think we do need plastic bags at the grocery. And there's even extended producer responsibility legislation that's being led out of Maine, Oregon, and California. So we do see, but I think it reflects the large and diverse country that we are, that makes us great in a lot of ways.
I like the ban on the bans. That's funny. We were wondering also about whether, a lot young people are so focused on climate change and what they can do in their own individual ways. And if you had to explain to a truly young person, let's say 8-year-old, what they could do to be more environmentally conscious or less wasteful in their daily practice, what would your advice be?
So yeah, I think this issue is quite easy to understand. And I think you saw part of my charter lecture, and I was actually thinking about that lecture, the person in physics and in genetic modification, they had to like really talk a lot about, just even what those things are before they could talk about, sort of their work. Everyone knows what plastics are, right? And so I think, that has an advantage to be able to understand it. But I think where it gets hard is I think it's quite overwhelming. Because if you think about sort of making change, you're like, but like, how would I do that? And, you go to the store and everything is packaged in plastic. You really only have availability, and you might be limited by cost. The two things that we found along the Ganges, which I think are absolutely true here, it was convenience and price, availability for, women specifically said this is why we choose plastic. So there's no judgment on that, because you really, if you, we have worked with dollar stores. If you can only shop at dollar type discount stores, I don't know that there's anything in there that's not plastic or have a part of plastic, packaging. And so, but that being said, you can sort of, make individual commitments, those that do have the luxury and sort of privilege of being able to have access to clean water. One thing that's quite easy is a reusable water bottle. And my kids have gotten, used to that. And one thing at a time is good, because I think if you do try to do it all, you'll get overwhelmed. Giving yourself grace in terms of if you do forget something, kind of like forgetting your homework when you are a kid or whatever, you're like, oh no, I could, it's just that one time. All the other times that you remembered, you're good. And this also is not necessarily, well, actually kids have very powerful voices. So I would definitely say this to an 8-year-old, but obviously through adults too, using your voice for change. I think we have seen companies react to people do really care about this issue. That person I talked to would be very wrong now, right? People do really care, and companies are trying to change. And so I think that has because, people have used their voice and said, I don't want this kind of packaging, or I don't want this in plastic, or I really, and so I have started to see change. And actually, when we think about the amount of time from when people weren't caring till now, that really is only 20, just over 20 years. It's not that long, but I still hope that I still would like to see more rapid change.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So important. And I also love what you said about being kind to yourself and graceful with yourself, like the homework example, for sure. And so related to this too, we were interested in packaging and kind of marketing issues related to that. So there is a lot of trust in what companies put on their packaging about recycling and what's environmentally friendly, but we know that companies may overstate. They're definitely not averse to overstating how virtuous their products are. So can you give us some insight about how to be more cognizant of these issues and what we should think about when we're shopping at the grocery store?
Yeah. First of all, I have a hard time grocery shopping. So, and, I was thinking, I think this is a great question, but I don't know that I don't think you're going to love my answer, because I'm not going to be able to, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to help with this, because I thought about it and I'm like, I do this for a living, and I get confused sometimes, or find it challenging to avoid plastic or find the most environmentally friendly packaging, because you're like, okay, if you're thinking about recycling, if there's more mass of plastic, that's better for recycling, but you're trying to avoid plastic in the first place because you would like to reduce production. So a lot of things have been lightweighted, right? So they're using less plastic, or they're using film plastic, but that inherently often makes something less recyclable, because film is lighter, less recyclable. And, so we can't put film in our, curbside recycle bin. So then you have to take that somewhere special where they're collecting film. So, yeah. And as a part of our research, so we're looking at how things are packaged. So we're studying this issue. And if you go, for example, to one of the staple goods we look at on packaging is rice. And I feel like when I was a kid, there was not that many different packages for rice. But when I took pictures and was studying, and then we're giving like the percent is packaged this way. Rice is packaged in 11 ways. 11 ways. And so But then you're looking at it and the only package, so there's single serving rice, there's like pouch rice, there's different pouch rices. They're not all the same. So the only rice that came in non-plastic was minute rice. And minute rice is already kind of processed, right? Like usually it's not, if you wanted to get the long grain organic rice, that comes in plastic, and so then you're like, well, if you're trying to avoid plastic but provide the healthiest product that you want, you run into those challenges and tensions all the time. Hence, my husband really does most of the grocery shopping because I take forever or I have a panic attack. So I think we're expecting way too much from people when, and probably the knowledge that I have is makes me have sort of this paralyzation. But I think we have way too many options. I was like, do we really need this many different kinds of rice and these different packaging? And of course there's, the bags of rice. Anyway, I could go on and on about that, but I'm finding this to be a system very challenging to navigate myself. And I think we're expecting way too much of people. So I don't know that, like I said, that I'm answering this in a way that giving you the answer. But I think the answer is we need that system to be simplified, because that would also help on the circularity as well. And so we really need to change the system to make it easier for people to participate in.
Those are excellent points. And also because, if you're trying to be ecologically, environmentally aware in one context, let's say by, buying produce that's locally produced and then it's really hard to weigh what's better or worse. And you're standing there in front of the shelf thinking, what do I do here? So I'm glad I'm not the only one who has these panic issues, not panic, but just sort of, God, what's the right thing to do here?
Yep.
Gosh. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. So let's jump track and ask about you more personally.
Sure.
Because we're really interested in understanding, what excites you about science or being a scientist, and a lot about what you think were the critical factors that allowed you to be so creative and productive throughout your career. So maybe you start by, I saw that we've seen that you've done environmental engineering your entire time, and you said that you got to plastics despite best recommendations. So where did this all begin? And it's a long career, a very productive career. So what are the things that sort of kept you going, and what got you interested in plastics in the first place?
Well, I call myself an accidental engineer because I didn't mean to take engineering and I can describe why I say that. I always had a really strong environmental ethic growing up. So I knew I wanted to do what I thought environmental science. But I had all kinds of other things happening in life, as we all do. And I went to, my parents divorced when I was 2, and my dad moved to Florida. And because of his residency and how they did the income taxes, I had Florida residency. And my older brother had gone to the University of Florida. So I went to the University of Florida for school. So I picked that I just figured there was something environmental there. It's a huge school, so when I got there, this wasn't really where you, things were just different. There wasn't an internet with all the majors and all that. It wasn't sort of an easy way to do that. So when I got there, I got the big book of majors, and I'm looking through and I go to E, and I just remember there's no environmental science. I was like, wait, what? How can there not be this? But there was environmental engineering science. And I was like, oh, well, that's just a word in between the 2 words that I'm looking for. I was so naive. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a teacher. I didn't know any engineers. I had never met an engineer that I can even think of. I don't think it was, I'm from a tiny town in Minnesota. That's where I went to school, 2,000 people. I can't think of it, or at least it didn't impact me in any way. All I wanted to do was environmental science. So I took the major, and luckily I really liked math, but it was very hard for me. And this is something I often share with students. I did not get straight A's. I mean, I did okay, but I got a C in statics. I mean, I just found some of the concepts of it quite challenging. As they got more applied, it got easier and easier. So I knew I could do it. So as, statics and then dynamics, pretty abstract. As hydrodynamics, okay, we're talking about water now. Okay, did well there. And then thermodynamics, even better. But it was some of those abstract engineering concepts were hard for me. So yeah, I think the other kind of interesting story here is that my mom, when I told her that I was going to do environmental engineering, she freaked out. Instead of like, you would think, this sounds like a good career. Now we're, engineers, all the graduates, we have like a really amazing, job, people getting job rate. And but she was a part of the environmental movement in the 70s. And if you look at that history, the Sierra Club formed when the Army Corps of Engineers were doing things like damming our rivers, right? And engineering our environment in such a way that it was actually harming the environment. And so when she heard the word engineer, she immediately equated with harming our environment. I said, no, I promise I'm gonna be a good one. I want to help the environment. That's why it's environmental engineering. And she was like, okay, we'll see. So I think luckily there was a path for that. And to me, it was about preventing pollution and preserving our environment. So I think that's a pretty good story. I don't know, the plastics thing I referred to earlier, when I heard about that for my PhD, I was like, I think we need to do it. I was the only, I think, environmental engineer in a space where it had been marine scientists and people looking at this problem in the ocean. But I was like, I think we need to study it on land. Yeah. So that's really how I felt strongly about entering this space way back in 2000.
That's awesome. We have some more personal questions for you as well. Can you tell us about things that you're reading or listening to, books or podcasts right now, and also just other books that have had a central influence in your thinking and perspectives? Maybe share 3 with us. And if we can add in another question.
Sure.
You work so hard. So what do you do to maintain balance in the midst of that?
Sure. Okay, so I'll probably start with influential books. And I would say, I mean, this is fun because I've actually, like, without being asked this, I've talked about some books that have impacted me. So Madeline, I used to read like nonstop. Books were like a security blanket for me. I think part of it was the travel between my 2 parents. It was just like something that was consistent, or a place that I could go no matter where I was. So I had them like, at the dinner table. I mean, I don't know that I read at the dinner table, but I remember them being with me on the planes, on the travels. So anyway, but A Wrinkle in Time really impacted me. Madeleine L'Engle books, I think because of the science aspect. But also when I was thinking, and this is going to relate to the balance question as well. So as I was reading A Wrinkle in Time, I remember the moment where the kids are traveling through time and they're working with, I can't remember if it's What's It or Who's It, but one of the women that they see has them looking in the crystal ball, and they get to look back and see how their mom is doing while they're not there. And she's in the lab connected to the house, like stirring stew with a Bunsen burner. We're making stew with the Bunsen burner. I was just like, what? Like, you could. Okay, so first of all, I used to like go into the bathroom and take like my mom's talcum powders, and she didn't even use that much powder and perfume, but she had a bunch of this stuff, and like make concoctions and just so like this lab concept, I just absolutely loved. And so the fact there was like a lab connected to the house and you could be like doing what you had to do as a mom as well, all of a sudden, like this is a totally fictional story, but I just was like, wait, you could actually combine all that. Because I knew I wanted to do both of those. And A Ring of Endless Light and some of those books, the first kind of scientist I wanted to be was a marine biologist, because that was like, I don't know, for some reason it seemed like that was what women could do. I still don't know why, but I've had several other women say that that was what they thought too. I loved computer programming, and after school we would program in BASIC and things, but I never ever thought that could be a job, let alone a job for women. So anyway, so I think those were books as a child that impacted me. As an adult, I've read a few parenting books, and I think there's one, there's a Mama Zen book, I think, about just everything is sort of, I think being mindful and sort of in the moment as a parent is some of the best way that I have found to feel rewarded, I guess, in that space. I don't know if that's the right term, but maybe calmer. So, just thinking, like the laundry's never going to end. So don't like get frustrated that it's not ever going to end. You might as well just embrace that it never ends. Finding creativity. So we also talk about creativity here. I found that, I grew up on a river. I don't know, there's something about running water for me. So I find creative moments like doing dishes. So I think trying to capture moments that you can. So I'm bleeding into your balance question here, and sort of like there is no balance. I mean, that's the other thing. I think of this as like a pendulum, right? Like sometimes you're too far one way and too far the other way. It's more like, do you average in the middle, sort of? Or if you notice you're swinging, too far one way, you can come back. But I mean, that's really how I see it. It's not a balance such that like every day is a balance. It's hopefully an overall balance, even across average several periods of time. Because certainly before 2020, I was traveling, 50 to 60% of my time. And I'm really glad I'm home more now. And then I think you asked kind of what I'm listening to now, or reading. I don't get to read very much for pleasure anymore, which I think I just did so much as a kid. Maybe I filled my brain enough or filled that enough, and hopefully I will maybe when work gets less, but I read so much for work that I don't end up, unless there's something that I'm interested in. It's more the news, honestly, the news and kind of like current events and what's happening. Listening, I listen to NPR in the car when I'm driving, because that's like where I can get stories. I love like The Takeaway, It's Been a Minute, different shows on NPR. Because people have asked about podcasts, because I have a podcast under development called Aquathread. And so they're like, what are your favorite podcasts? I'm like, actually, I just listened to the radio myself, but all these shows are like podcasts. So that's in collaboration with WUGA, and a lot of young early career co-hosts that are working with me and talking to some of these incredible people that I've met around the world about this topic, but other topics like real life. I mean, kind of similar to the conversation that we're having here. And so I'm excited for that as well. That's kind of that update.
Thank you for that. I think we have 5 minutes, and so we'll take one. I see one question in the chat saying thanks for a fascinating session. You've been mainly talking about larger visible plastic products that can be logged and hopefully picked up. I've read some alarming stuff about microplastics recently. Is there work being done on tracking these in the same way? Is this even possible?
Yes. That's a great question. And when I was kind of showing that fragmented plastic, I I should have referenced this, but I didn't. And I think when I was talking about some of those human health implications, that's what I was referring to, but I didn't specifically describe this. And what is often found floating on the ocean is microplastic, both that you can see with the naked eye, but then a lot that is needed with a microscope, needed to count and look at. And yes, so there's Raman spectroscopy, ways to both visualize and count microplastics, and then even nanoplastics, although those are harder to isolate, but there is the capability to both see, identify, and count microplastics, and that is happening. It is hard to do both, but through our New Materials Institute, there is microplastics work happening at UGA. Also, like Krista Capps and others at UGA are doing some really great work in that space too.
Great.
Thanks
Thanks so much.
I do have a couple more questions in the limited amount of time we've got left. Can you share the story in our last couple of minutes of how you received the news about receiving the MacArthur Fellowship, and how has receiving this incredible honor changed your life?
Sure. So I believe they tried calling me. Well, I know they tried calling me and I didn't answer because I don't answer numbers that I don't know from my phone. So they had to email me to plan a time to talk, but it was about giving a reference. So that was, that was a way to get me on the line. And then they told me, and I, luckily I was sitting down, because I was planning on, giving, talking. And so, yeah, actually I was sitting right where I am right now. And it was very intense. I mean, it was just sort of like all of those little moments I told you of obstacles and things where, yes, there'd been a lot of success, but at the same time, it just sort of like almost all like flashed together in a moment. And I started crying. I mean, I was just completely overwhelmed with emotion and shocked as well, completely shocked. So yeah, it did not sink in for a very long time. Like, because at first and you're allowed to tell one person. So I told my husband, and it's like 6 weeks, I think, before it becomes public, and you have to do some things, to help. They do the profiles on you, so you kind of have to do that. And, like, oh, there's someone coming to film. Luckily, some of that, people didn't really care. It wasn't really that hard in that sense, but you had to keep it in. Mm-hmm. And I had like a big conference that I went to and I couldn't tell anyone. So that was all because it didn't seem real. Honestly, in a way it wasn't hard because I was like, I don't know if this is really happening. Yeah. But then, it was announced, and then it slowly started to sink in after that. So, in terms of how I'm still, I say to people, I'm still just me. I'm me. But it did make me realize, and at first there's also, it's both like validation, and yet at the same time, you're like, wait, why me? So it's like, that imposter syndrome and it's like, how is this happening? But I think what I really thought about is like, okay, I did get this, but it's a platform now. People are looking at me more, but I can share that platform. So part of my goal with the podcast was like, okay, if my name is maybe known more now, but look who I can, bring and help highlight and, share this platform and share voices and amplify messages. And so that's kind of what made me feel like, okay, I can do this, because I can do things like that now.
That's brilliant. Well, congratulations to you, and thank you. I know how busy you are and how in demand you are to do this sort of thing. So I really appreciate that you took the time out of your schedule to do this. Especially the interview format is such fun that we get to ask you what we want to ask you. So yeah. I'm glad. I'm glad you played along. Thank you all for listening. The next session will start like a minute later. But thank you all for being here. And Katie, thank you also for the tag team on this. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great morning, the rest of you. And I hope to see you in the next session as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.